Oh, look at that. He contacted me on a video connection all by himself with no help from a younger person. Eric Segall, welcome back. You're our favorite.
Thank you, Pete. Happy to be here. I'm in a mood.
He's in a mood, ladies and gentlemen.
I'm in a mood.
I obviously want to unpack your mood and want to welcome everybody who is watching live. And I want to just start by asking you about the breaking news here on a Tuesday, election day, that Dick Cheney died. And I know you have thoughts. I have thoughts. I've been watching people share their thoughts all morning. I feel like one of the most accurate reactions that I've seen, which is a pretty common one, is people saying, I never thought it could get worse than Dick Cheney, but it got so much worse, much worse, in fact, that Dick Cheney himself cut an ad before the election saying that Trump was the most dangerous person America's ever seen. And it was pretty stark coming from him because of who he is. So that's my quick take. What is yours?
I have two. First of all, Henry Kissinger was worse than Dick Cheney. So Henry Kissinger destroyed a country for generations for no good military reason. So that's the first thing. Not that Dick Cheney wasn't awful. The second thing is this. There was a moment in time, Pete, and I know your audience is going to find this hard to believe, when Alan Dershowitz, the Harvard law professor, who's now a laughingstock, was actually a serious person who did seriously good work for criminal defendants and was a real person. And he once said something really profound, I thought. And it was the day Justice William Rehnquist died. On the day a day after Justice William Rehnquist died, he wrote an op-ed for the New York Times or the Washington Post. I forget which. And at that time, Dershowitz, who was a reasonable human being, said the following: my mama taught me two things. Always tell the truth and never speak ill of the dead. And Dershowitz said, these two values, which I hold dear, are in conflict today. I agree. Always tell the truth. I do that. And try not to speak ill of the dead, such that when Scalia died, and I got a number of phone calls and requests, I said, I'm not saying anything bad about him today because his family is in the world. And in Dick Cheney's case, you know, his family is in the world. And one of his family members, I think, you know, has done America a pretty good solid for the last few years. So here's my answer. I don't miss him.
So you stay principled on the don't speak ill of the dead?
Not on the day he dies.
So tomorrow?
Well, I waited 2 weeks for Scalia.
What?
So
I still can't get you to say anything about Charlie Kirk. You're terrified.
Yeah, I'm not going to say anything about it. I'm not terrified. But again, his family is still mourning. So, you know, but look, hold on. Henry Kissinger, William Rehnquist, and Antonin Scalia did unconscionable harm to this country in government positions. Charlie Kirk did not have a government position. It's a different situation.
I was only saying, I would certainly not comparing them, although he was the most influential person in the conservative movement, arguably. So you can connect the dots, but I wasn't comparing him to Kissinger or Cheney, who I would say Cheney was the worst of his generation when it comes specifically, obviously, to war crimes, to a war, to a generation of veterans being destroyed. It wasn't nearly as terrible as Vietnam was, obviously, but it was a generation.
To be clear, I wasn't referring to Vietnam, which wasn't Kissinger's. I was referring to Cambodia, which Kissinger carpet bombed, led to tyranny, starvation for generations.
Yeah,
under the pretense that was a national security thing for getting our troops home safely, but it wasn't. It was revenge. Right. It was, you know, the history is pretty clear on this.
When I said Vietnam, I meant Cambodia as well, but I also meant the Vietnam War. Okay, so that's Cheney. That's done. Let me ask you just...
it is done, Pete.
Listen, sounds awful.
I'm in a mood.
You're here to talk about a Supreme Court case that will be argued tomorrow that deals with whether or not the president has the ability, or responsibility to do everything around tariffs. I also want to ask you about his violation of the War Powers Act and the fact that I guess every president has. But just real quick, hot takes.
Yeah.
Hot takes with Segall. Yeah. It's election day. And I wonder if there's any elections that you're paying attention to, or any thoughts on America here on election day and how the strength of our democracy is.
Well, the strength of our democracy is very, very weak, and getting weaker as we talk. And during the 1 hour or however long we spend together, it'll get weaker during that hour. There are a couple of local elections in Georgia that my friends are telling me I have to vote in. I don't, other than governors and senators and mayors, I don't usually get involved in local elections because my time is so busy doing federal stuff. But I don't. Next, talk to me in 1 year. 1 year from today, or next election day, that's going to be the big one. And that election day, I don't know why leaf blowers just started, but I hope you don't.
No one can hear it.
Okay, good. I fucking hate leaf blowers.
Really? That seems like a pretty first world problem.
Yes, but we can go to the moon, so we should have leaf blowers.
That's a fair point. It's a fair.
At least I think we went to the moon. I'm more interested in what's happening in preparation to next year's election, because that's not just about who gets in office, but that's about the future of American elections. So we'll see.
So whether or not the midterm elections will be, quote, free and fair, how much of a thumb will be on the scale in any district or any state as a result of, by the way, that state's responsibility to regard, regulate, secure their own elections. And we have seen all kinds of fealty to a king from MAGA Republicans. And so it's not hard to imagine that some, state or another.
Let's not forget that the United States Constitution, that document that used to govern our country, actually, in terms of elections for the House and the Senate, states do have the first and primary responsibility for choosing the time, place, and manner of elections. However, Congress can override that. And for example, the reason we have single-member districts is because Congress passed a law a long time ago requiring single-member districts as opposed to ranked choice voting and things I don't know anything about. But Congress could override all the stuff states do about elections for the House and the Senate. So we have to blame Congress too, to some extent. I mean, it's not the president. Congress has the ultimate authority to regulate elections in this country. We shouldn't forget that.
Statewide elections?
No, but elections for the House and Senate.
So when states rig their own districts to effectuate an outcome, Congress can't really do much about that other than encourage.
That's a complicated question. Let's leave that for a different day. But as to the House and the Senate, the Constitution is completely clear. Congress, the states can regulate time, place, and manner, but Congress can override that. Let's be clear about that.
Okay, so today's election day, but tomorrow there will be an argument made at the Supreme Court, actually two, I guess, regarding whether or not the president of the United States can control how tariffs work, and more specifically, how he can use the law or the Constitution, I guess is what they're.
Not the Constitution. So let's be clear at the outset. I've been thinking a lot about how to present this to you because it's complicated.
Yeah.
Your audience knows me. Most of your audience knows me and knows my views about judges and all that. This is not a constitutional law case. And the reason I'm saying that is because, as you know, as your audience knows, I'm not in favor of the court being interventionist in constitutional law cases. So I'm usually a person advocating judicial restraint, even in cases like abortion, where I'm radically pro-choice, but famously against Roe versus Wade. This is not that kind of case. This is a case interpreting federal statutory law. So it doesn't trigger my usual reluctance to have judges have to get involved one way or the other in this because we're interpreting a federal statute. We're not interpreting the federal Constitution. That's very important.
We're not interpreting the federal Constitution. That's very important. Got it. Nonetheless, Supreme Court's going to hear oral arguments in two consolidated cases that present the question whether our dear leader can impose upon tariffs under the International Emergency Economic Powers Act.
Let's just call it IEPA.
IEPA.
IEPA. IEPA.
fun to say.
Yeah.
And this matters for a lot of reasons. I read what you sent me to read, and I got a little kind of bored by the analysis of the interpretation of it. So how can you make me, I feel like the most important thing here is if he can do this, yet another power that you're giving the executive, what can't he do, as Michael Dorf makes in one of the things he sent me in terms of the Federal Reserve. It's just, it would seem to me that if this decision goes in favor of the administration, it gives more power to the king and it becomes more of a kingdom. And that is the real issue here.
How about we back up and let me try to make the issues accessible. I may fail, but let me try to make the issues accessible and then talk big picture, because there's two different things. The legal issues are one thing, the implications are another. So there's a law, and it's a good law, Pete. We should have this law that says where there is an emergency, a real emergency, the exact words are an extraordinary and unusual threat to the United States, then the president can declare a national emergency and exercise all kinds of powers that he normally would not be able to exercise. One of the uses of this law that people might remember is when our hostages were taken by Iran immediately back in 1980 or 81, 1979. You know, President Carter did all kinds of things. Iran had billions of dollars of assets in America, and Carter used this law appropriately to freeze those assets, to make sure Iran couldn't get them back, et cetera, et cetera. That was all done under IEPA. The idea is Congress said where there's a true emergency, then we're going to give the president more power than he has in non-emergencies. And that's a good law on paper. Like, we want this law. It's a good law. The problem here is this law, if there is an emergency, which as Mike Dorf argues in his blog yesterday and today, there is no emergency. What Donald Trump is calling an emergency is a trade deficit and trade imbalances that we've had for decades. By definition, if something's going on for decades, it's not extraordinary and it's not unusual and it's not an emergency. But even besides that, there's no mention of tariffs in this statute. The statute that Trump is relying on simply does not use the word tariff. It uses the word regulate imports. It's very important to this country's history to realize that regulating and taxing, tariffs or taxes, are different things. They're very different things. Congress has the power to regulate commerce. It also has the power to impose taxes. Those are different things. So not only is there no emergency under the statute, in my opinion, but also this law doesn't mention tariffs. Now, what the administration is saying is regulating imports gives the president the ability to say to China, Canada, Mexico, whoever, we're going to tax your goods coming into the country, 80%. The problem is, Pete, and this should be easy to understand, Congress has passed a bunch of other statutes that give the president the ability to impose tariffs. The tariff power is in Article 1, Section 8, which is Congress. Congress has the power to impose tariffs. Now, Congress can delegate that power to the president, and it has, in very narrow statutes that say the president can do these tariffs if this condition is met and for a very limited period of time and only to a certain percentage, 10%, 15%, whatever. So not only does this statute not cover tariffs, but dozens of other statutes do cover tariffs. And those are the laws the president should be using. So in all the legal questions, the president should lose. And I think that's and there are other reasons too. That's not why this case is so hugely important. What you were saying is, and I think you're right, is this is another example of President Trump using emergency powers like he's doing with federal troops, in American cities, and nationalizing the National Guard and shooting Venezuelan boats and whatever. It's another example of him declaring an emergency where none of us really think an emergency exists.
Right.
And that is the problem right there. That's the problem.
It is a repetitive action to declare emergency so he can use or take powers that he shouldn't. And my question is, what is the precedent for this? It's so easy so often to look at him and go, I can't believe he's doing this. And we can talk about the War Powers Act, but then you'll remind me Obama did it or something similar. It's never exactly the same, obviously, when we're comparing one administration to a past and then these different legal actions. But when did a president make up an emergency so he could take power? I'm sure it's happened, but what we're seeing on the streets, the things that he is saying and the things that they are doing, the purposeful propaganda and videos that they're making to make it seem like chaos in the streets, that's the easiest one to understand, because the law enforcement, the heads of law enforcement in those states and the governors and attorneys general of those states are saying it's our responsibility to keep our people safe, and we're telling you there's no emergency. We've got this through traditional law enforcement. It's one fucking block. You're making it seem like there's a riot. He's doing that here on tariffs. He's doing that in the streets. Do other presidents do it?
So the most famous example of this is an interesting one. It takes me a few minutes. It's not a sound. I can't give you a sound bite. But during the Korean War, the Steel Workers of America declared there's going to be a national strike. And President Truman, who had complicated relationships with labor, was very worried that a national steel strike in 1951, 52 would really jeopardize American men and women in Korea. It wasn't called a war, Pete, but it was a war. If anybody watches the show MASH, they know it was a war. There were bullets, there were guns, there were tanks, there were people dying. So Truman's lawyers go into court and they say, and by the way, President Truman was a Democrat, and there were 9 Democrat justices, 9, all 9. It was a Supreme Court of 9 Democrats with a Democrat president. And Truman's lawyers went into court and said, we have a national emergency. Our boys and girls will die if this steel strike happens. And the Supreme Court in a 6-3 decision, and then when he said, so I'm going to seize the steel mills, something Roosevelt had seized private property during World War II 3 times. He said, I'm going to do what FDR did 10 years ago and seize private property, and let the federal government run these steel mills so that we still have steel for guns, for tanks, for weapons, for planes. And 9 Democrats, 6 of whom said to President Truman, sorry, you can't do that.
Wow.
Only Congress can authorize the taking of private property, even in an emergency, even in time of war.
Wow.
And there were many different opinions, but the one that has stood the test of time, the one that Justice William Rehnquist cited in the case involving the Iran hostage crisis, is an opinion by Justice Robert Jackson. Robert Jackson, I have a blog post about this tomorrow on Dorf on Law.
Oh.
Justice Robert Jackson is one of those great justices who almost no one dislikes. In other words, we can talk about Scalia or Brennan or numerous other justices. The first one, John Marshall, and the great justices are normally controversial and divisive. Some people like them, some people hate them. The legal academy is almost unanimous that Justice Robert Jackson was a political moderate. He was the only justice, I think, in American history who was also the Attorney General of the United States and the Solicitor General of the United States. A very practical, well-liked moderate. And he wrote an opinion saying the president of his own political party can't do this because giving the president this kind of emergency power is really dangerous. It has no beginning, it has no end. And Truman called it an emergency. And the court stopped him from doing it. The court stopped him from doing it because they didn't believe it was a real emergency. Had they believed it was a real emergency, of course they would have let him do it, right? If they really believed American men and women were going to die, the court isn't going to stand in the way of the president. So this court, and by the way, Rehnquist clerked for Jackson and Roberts clerked for Rehnquist.
Right.
I would hope Justice Roberts looks at steel seizure, the spirit of that case, and says, we just can't let the president go around calling things emergencies that aren't emergencies. That, as you said at the beginning, that leads to much more power in the executive branch, if you want to talk about originalism, than the founding fathers ever would have wanted. It is true that during World War I, during World War II, during the Iran hostage crisis, after 9/11, these were emergencies. Like this was a time when you need a strong president and a strong executive. It just is, right? And now 9/11, I think over time, that became really problematic. But in the months after 9/11, we all thought it was an emergency, right? Everybody. This is not an emergency.
Well,
And
another
that's
thing
what
that
the
comes
court
to
just
mind is COVID, the pandemic, and the
Right.
argument that people made around whether or not the government should take over manufacturing plants to make sure they manufacture anything from face masks to ventilators, or as Andrew Cuomo pronounces them, ventilator.
Right. No, I mean, I think there were moments in time, 3 years after 9/11, where people can, when Osama bin Laden was still alive, when we can have reasonable disagreements over whether something is an emergency. And if there are reasonable disagreements, then the court should side with the president. But in the steel seizure case, there was no reasonable disagreement. And today, there is no reasonable disagreement. There is no emergency. Period. So he shouldn't exercise. The IEPA only applies to emergencies. We don't have an
Who decides? Who decides when something is an emergency? It sounds like what you're saying. In the past, the court did decide whether or not something was.
No. Most of the time, no, I'm not saying that. Most of the time, courts should defer to a president who declares an emergency, but it has to at least pass the straight face test. But then there's a bigger issue, Pete. And this is the issue that con law professors have been struggling with now since Trump got elected the second time. And I think I told you I wrote a blog post about how to teach con law in this environment, and it's very difficult. Do we treat President Trump as any normal president, or do we treat and teach that way, or do we treat President Trump as something different? So far, the Supreme Court of the United States, because of its loyalty to the Republican Party, has treated President Trump like any other president. And there's an argument for that, because whatever the court does today will matter 20 years from now. But my opinion is the Supreme Court should not be treating President Trump as any normal president. And my talking point for that is in the first 10 months of his second term, he has exercised more executive power in a grander way than any president since the Civil War. And our country is based on separation of powers, and our country is based on federalism. In other words, the way the founding fathers did a lot of terrible things, including slavery and a bunch of other stuff. But they had two great insights. One was dividing power at the national level is a good thing, so that power will be restrained. And dividing power between the federal government and the states is a good thing, so tyranny will be avoided. Trump is threatening both of those things by sending the National Guard or federalizing state National Guard units in just blue cities against the will of the state actors in those cities. He is threatening states' rights, something you would think the Republican Party would be against. Second, at the federal level, he's declaring everything an emergency, which basically, negates Congress's powers, something you would think the Republican Party would be against. This is a case tomorrow, where the court could send a signal to President Trump, we're not going to let you do this. So my question is, will they put Constitution and, frankly, originalism, which they claim to be, over party? And I don't know what they're going to do.
I guess probably nobody does. If they allow him to do this on tariffs, declare an emergency as a result there,
yes.
There's nowhere. I mean, where do they stop him?
Well, they seem to be. The weird thing about that is, before 2 years ago, these independent agencies, the FCC, the FTC, all those, Congress could limit the president's ability to fire the heads of those agencies. The Roberts Court has reversed all of that. And come June of this year, they're going to reverse everything and say the president has the unilateral power to fire independent agency officials for any reason he wants, except maybe the Federal Reserve, which makes no sense because there's no difference between the Federal Reserve Board and the FCC, the FTC, etc. Why are they doing this? Well, probably because they all have stocks. And they know that if the president can fire the Federal Reserve people for any reason, the stock market will in fact. So I don't know where these justices draw their lines. And let me be clear. I have gone on record now for the last 2 years as writing and saying in public, this is the most partisan court in American history. The one thing that these 6 justices all have in common is a completely slavish devotion to the Republican Party.
Right.
But I think the only thing more important to them than that is their own self-preservation. And giving Trump this power here and elsewhere not only threatens Congress and the people, but it threatens the court. So, and the power of the court. And other people have written persuasively that other than being Republican Party devotees, the other thing the Roberts Court has done is made itself an imperial court, that they get to decide everything. That's why lower court judges are being stripped of their power. That's why the court is using the emergency docket to expedite cases from the lower courts to their own authorities without oral arguments, usually without long briefings, because a professor at Stanford called it the imperial court. If the court bows to Trump in this case, it is basically saying checks and balances are over. And that's a serious thing.
Right, right. Well, yeah. Yeah. Well, let me ask you about another situation as well, because I read this line in I don't know which news, maybe the Times or something, but I think it sets the context. It appears that the Trump administration, did indeed ignore today's deadline for congressional approval of the ongoing strikes against Venezuela, required under the 1973 War Powers Act. It is taking the position that no approval is necessary since, in its formulation, U.S. military personnel are not at risk in the strikes that have so far killed 65 people. And when I saw that this morning, I was like, well, of course, that's what they're doing. And in addition to the fact that they're literally seemingly starting a war in South America, which would be something we've been able to avoid for my whole lifetime, pretty much.
Well, hold on just 1 second there. One of the reasons we've been able to avoid wars there is because back in the 70s, we used the CIA to topple democratically elected leaders.
Well, we can certainly talk about the different conflicts and sides that both intelligence agencies and the military have taken in Central and South America throughout the 80s and before. But in this case, they're shooting fishing boats or maybe drug boats. They've been trying to covertly, Trump even said it, overthrow the leader of Venezuela, something America has always done but not talked about openly.
Right. Yeah.
And they are also potentially talking about threatening, saber rattling, actual military boots on the ground, I think it's fair to say. So let's talk about the War Powers Act.
Yeah. And sorry, again, I don't have a soundbite answer for this. This law was passed after Vietnam because, of course, we fought a war in Vietnam for over 12 or 13 years, lost 55,000 Americans, something like that, and never declared a war. The war was never declared. Article 1, Section 8 gives Congress the power to declare war. World War I was declared. World War II was declared. That was the last war that was actually declared. However, every president, Nixon vetoed the War Powers Resolution, the War Powers Act, but then Congress overrode his veto. And as far as I know, every president since has said it's unconstitutional. President Obama bombed Libya and did not comply with the War Powers Act when he did so. He used actual bombs. And the rationalization that was given was that the War Powers Act only applies to hostilities. That's the legal term, hostilities. And President Obama's administration said Americans were never at risk because we were dropping bombs from drones and, I guess, planes. And because Americans were not on the ground, there were no hostilities that put Americans at risk. What Donald Trump is doing is an extension of that because we were bombing Libya for military reasons. I don't think we are bombing these boats for military reasons. But this is one area where almost every president has abused their power. I was at the Justice Department when President Bush said, I am going to Kuwait. I am going to use military forces on the ground in Kuwait. I hope Congress gives me authorization. That was clearly going to be a war. I hope Congress authorizes this, but I'm doing it anyway. Now, it turns out Congress authorized it, but he was going to do it anyway. I was there. I know.
And Obama in Libya.
And Obama in Libya. And by the way, not just Libya, It's not exactly the same thing, but Obama pressed a button, or his people pressed a button, and killed an American citizen having lunch in Yemen who was never declared by any court to be a criminal. Now, this American citizen was a criminal, was a terrible terrorist. This is not up for debate. His website showed it. But he was still an American citizen who had no due process. And President Obama assassinated him.
The issue around that was can a president assassinate an American citizen? And overwhelmingly, popular opinion was, yeah, if it's that guy. Let's just be clear. I didn't support that, and
I didn't either. Actually.
A lot of people on the left didn't, and the principled people didn't. As bad of a guy was, because you do believe in due process and so on. But I think it's even. So my point there is saying we weren't too concerned about that because of who the guy was, and we're even less concerned about people on fishing boats who are not citizens and may or may not be running, deadly drugs.
Pete, if they're drug cartels, he should arrest them. He shouldn't kill them.
Of course, he should arrest them, and they should do investigative work and due process and bring them to justice, which is what we have done. This country has done, around the drug cartels forever, and the war on drugs, which has obviously failed. But one can only imagine how much worse it would be if we just let them bring drugs in all the time on their own, I guess, without
I'm not sure, but I don't know enough about that last sentence. People who do are skeptical of that claim, but go ahead.
Well, I've argued that all drugs should be legal over and over, and libertarians have for a long time. But I'm saying there is no perfect solution. We love our drugs. All I'm saying is, if it were illegal and we let them drive across the border or float them in on a ship or fly them in and did nothing, then that would be bad. I think if we have laws, we should enforce them, generally speaking. I mean, those kinds of laws.
Although remember, federal law still prohibits most marijuana products, and we don't enforce that except against people of color sometimes.
Ray in the chat says it's bullshit. Alaki surrenders his American citizenship when he becomes a terrorist and an enemy of the U.S.
No, only with due process, or if he's on the battlefield. If an American citizen, we're fighting World War II, and some Americans fought for Germany. Okay,
American guy joined the Taliban.
Joining the Taliban is not renouncing American citizenship, unless he did so under oath in the courtroom. The point is,
if he takes up arms and he's shooting Americans in Afghanistan.
No, but that person who was, by the way, a civilian, was also killed in that, who was not a terrorist in that attack.
For sure. We're not talking about him.
So what President Obama did in that situation was he said, this is a very dangerous person who has been responsible for terrorist attacks in the past, in my opinion, who wants to do it again, and who is underground. So we have no choice but to kill him when we see him. Those were the rationales. That came 2 years after he did it. Not before, not simultaneous with, not a week after, but like a year, something between a year and 2 years afterwards. The problem with that, what your friend is saying in the chat there, is you give President Obama that power, and then future presidents take that power and abuse it, as President Trump would do, as we both know. So I think that issue is difficult. But in any event, it's one thing to assassinate an American citizen having lunch in Yemen, who in his own website we know is a terrorist, and killing people bringing drugs into this country with no due process, when we could just seize the boat. This is not this is not like Navy ships coming in. This isn't warships coming at us. These are small boats with 20 people. I mean,
this is, by the way, literally what the Coast Guard does all day, every day.
Right. Exactly.
People are making it seem like that the open seas are the Wild West, and you can just drive a boat in wherever you want. Right. Obviously, there are gaps and holes, but there are planes and boats constantly, and submarines, by the way, quote, protecting the United States homeland all day, every day, and they can easily be tracked and arrested. And by the way, those boats that we're killing, by the way, are like off the coast of South America, headed to the Caribbean, not to the U.S.
So there's another difference.
The boats have like 3 outboard motors. Do you think they're fucking driving from South America to Miami? They're not. I mean, you don't have to know a lot about boats. And if they are, their entire haul is fuel, not fentanyl.
Right. But there's another difference too. And your friend in the chat has to concede this, I think. The guy in Yemen who was having lunch was probably responsible for killing American citizens in very direct ways. Not himself, but his groupies or whatever. These boats aren't killing anybody direct. I agree we should stop the drugs. You just said that. We both agree. Stop the drugs.
We do.
But you don't have to kill these people to do that. You
But we
just
do, but
don't.
just to make your point more clear and the law more clear, we stop trucks, we stop planes, and we stop boats every day. All day, every day, we stop them. Most people aren't carrying anything, but we stop them. People get investigated at every border, at every point of entry, but they don't get fucking assassinated without being investigated. Like, you board the ship, you find the drugs, you say, where did these come from? You go to the route. That's how it's done.
When Obama assassinated that American citizen, and even when Obama bombed Libya, which I do think, by the way, was a violation of the War Powers Act, he wasn't doing it for symbolic reasons. No one in the world thought Obama was bombing Libya to make himself look strong as a political campaign. None of that. There were military reasons for doing so. Again, I think Obama was
to help support in Libya. It was to help support the resistance against Gaddafi and the after the Arab Spring.
Now, again, I think that was illegal what Obama did in Libya. Believing that aside, I think we have enough evidence to suggest that what President Donald Trump is trying to do here is send a message. And presidents are allowed to send messages, and they're allowed to make strong symbolic acts, but they shouldn't be killing people when they do that. Especially when, again, what Obama's memorandum said was we had to take this act as a matter of necessity. There was no other way to kill this terrorist because he was hiding. He was hiding all the time. He only came out, once in a while, and usually came out surrounded by people. So we had this one opportunity, and we had to do it. Those facts are very different than the facts today with these boats, which the Coast Guard could surround and arrest with very little. I've been watching a bunch of Netflix shows over the last few years, some of which involve Florida, and they all depict, I don't know if they're accurate or not, but they all depict Coast Guard vessels doing exactly what you're saying. They introduce, they see a drug boat coming, they surround the boat, they say, we're coming aboard, and by the way, these boats don't fight back. They have no weapons to fight back, They try to.
What do they yell?
Oh, never mind. I'm in a mood.
I love that you almost always reference, all kinds of different sources to back up your point. But the fact that you just took me aback when you're like, I've been watching a lot of Netflix lately. You never.
Going back to this case tomorrow, by the way,
I
want to mention an important fact, which is normally in these kinds of cases that involve major economic consequences, you have two sides, right? You have the liberals arguing X and the conservatives / libertarians arguing Y. Most of the interest groups that are interested in the economy are on the same side of this case. Don't give the president this power. Because tariffs are stupid, but that's not the court's business. The court's business is this good or bad for the economy?
Yeah.
But what these interest groups are saying is the reason why tariffs are given to Congress in Article 1 is important because tariffs are really serious things. And when we impose them outside of the emergency context, it should be done with reflection and by the people's representatives, not one person.
Yeah.
And it's amazing. Cato and the Brennan Center. So the Brennan Center is the most liberal, $1 billion funded organization under the rubric of NYU law. It's always on the liberal side of everything. Cato is incredibly, libertarian / conservative. They bring a lot of cases about it. They're on the same side. Like everyone's on the same side of this.
It's true also of that you're talking about the issue of whether or not who has power to tariff. Yeah. And it makes obvious sense that it should be in the power of the representatives of the people because it's my industry that you're hurting, specifically, let's say like agriculture or anything else, manufacturing or just, frankly, everything really. The other one that's similar to that, by the way, I always think about is immigration. There's no special interest and there's a lot of solidarity amongst the most profitable interests in America. they be pro-immigration, which is obvious. The only reason against immigration, overwhelmingly, I mean, we can talk about economics all day long, but it is in terms of special interests. It's not churches, it's not farms, it's not traditional conservative right-wing influencers. It's racism, like it's xenophobia, and because it gets people fired up and it gets people to vote and it gets ratings and it gets followers and so on. But there's not like special interests again, because everybody's on the same page with tariffs and immigration, which is make as much fucking money as we can. Don't take money from us. Don't take people from us. Don't make our goods and services way more expensive unilaterally.
And because you mentioned immigration, I get to mention something I haven't mentioned in at least 10 of our last episodes, which is a record for me. I get to mention Judge Richard Posner.
No, you've mentioned Posner drinking.
No, I have not in a while. It's been a while.
Drink.
The most famous judge not to sit on the Supreme Court, probably in American history. He's now very, very sick and can't talk. But when I talked to him in 2012, 13, 14, 15, the topic that made him the maddest, and he got mad at a lot of things, got mad at Scalia, got mad at Trump, got mad at a lot of things. But the topic that got him the angriest was immigration judges in the Seventh Circuit, where he was a judge, because he thought these immigration judges would just rubber stamp what INS said. This is during Obama's administration, and didn't in any way stand up for these immigrants who were here. He was appointed by Ronald Reagan. He was traditionally a conservative. And he said our immigration system back then was broken, but not in the way Trump is saying. He was saying the law doesn't reflect the reality. And he was the father of the law and economics movement, going to your point. And what really bothered him about this was the underemphasis on how important immigrants are to the American economic system. And
to every economic system of every country. I mean,
I don't know about that, but I know about America.
I do. I think I do. At this point in time, if somehow your native population was overproducing, maybe there are some impoverished nations which don't benefit from more people, I'm sure. But overwhelmingly, I'm thinking of the more wealthy countries that have, as a result, lower birth rates, and they need immigrant labor. I think that's how it works, but I don't know shit. So.
Yeah. Well, but you are 50 years old, and that's pretty cool.
50. I am 50. Look how good I look.
How long have you look great? How long have you had that Batman thing in the background?
Sure, it looks good on me, I think.
By the way, are my books in the background, by the way?
Yeah, your books.
Okay. Just making sure. Uh-oh, we're frozen. Oh. Yes, and it counts, in the words of Marv Albert. So I guess we can't talk about the NBA?
We're frozen? We're not frozen.
You were a second ago. Pete, the gambling thing in the NBA is serious. This is a serious thing.
So apparently the gambling thing in the NBA is serious, but I would argue, from what very little I know, and I shouldn't even say anything out loud because I'm sure there's plenty of people watching that know more about both sports and sports gambling to me. Money in sports is always been an argument that it destroys sports, but the pain of college players in college is one thing. But the gambling that has been legalized throughout the country, I feel like I've read opinions from smart people that say it's inevitable. It destroys everything. It's not.
So this is complicated. I know about this. I'm almost an expert.
But the NBA gambling scandal is very layered and convoluted. I don't want to. I mean, my point isn't what players and coaches and others do as much as throwing games and so on. That's always been a part of sports. You can get involved in if you want. You can get blackmailed into and so on. I'm talking about legalized gambling.
I was going to go there. Let me just say 1 sentence, 2 sentences. I was going to go there. First
Donnie
of all,
says the NBA is toast. What are we saying? Why are people pronouncing the NBA dead?
It's not. And by the way, we all know that in 2002, Game 6 of the NBA Finals was thrown. So the Lakers, semifinals, so that the Lakers would get to the finals. The 1919 Black Sox, they've been scandals forever. That's not my angle on this, Pete. The NBA is not toast. Although if people lose faith in the integrity of the game, then it's like professional wrestling. That's not going to happen. I have a different problem, which is, as someone who's gambled his entire life and plays poker and other things, my problem is the fucking phone. This is my problem. Because when you give 22-year-olds and 24-year-olds and 26-year-olds the ability to bet on every single play in an NBA, NFL, Major League game. You can bet on how many foul shots a person makes. You can bet on whether a person, the next is the next thing going to be a field goal or a touchdown.
Yeah.
Is the next pitch good? When you can do that, the addictive nature of gambling is going to get out of control, and then that leads to predators who can use that to get even more money. The reality is it was FanDuel who brought to the NBA's attention the cheating involving Terry Rozier, because FanDuel and the other big ones don't want cheating in sports because they lose money. If there's cheating in sports, they're the ones who lose money. There's better reporting today than there's ever been on players and coaches throwing games or whatever. That isn't the problem. The problem, to my surprise, because I've always been in favor of legal betting, but you take legal betting and cell phones and technology and the internet, and you put it all together, and there's going to be a major crisis. There just is. There's going to be a major financial sports betting crisis that's going to do a lot to hurt American sports.
And now this is
wait, one more sentence. The reason that's sad to me is that sports and maybe theater are the two places where Americans can still get together and be Americans together. Where we can go to a football game or a basketball game and put aside all political differences.
Do you think people start betting on the outcome of a Broadway show?
No, but I think Republicans and Democrats can both enjoy Les Miserables. That's what I think.
Well, is that Segall speaking? The crisis is coming, because I feel like a lot of other people who are even smarter, God forbid, than you on politics, on sports and gambling, are saying that kind of a thing. I haven't really.
It's more about addiction than sports and gambling. I will tell you this, that I went on South Korean television. South Korean radio and podcast. First time in my life. It was really fun to talk about the lawsuit against Meta and TikTok and Snapchat, that they knew their algorithms would make teenagers addicted to all kinds of terrible ways, self-harm, eating disorders, suicide, etc. And we even talked a little bit about gambling on that interview, because we do have to rethink how the human brain responds. I'm not an expert on this, Pete, but I've done a fair amount of research now. We have to rethink some of our premises about how the human brain responds to a little box in our hands that is extraordinarily addictive. And if you think about it, the cigarette companies knew that cigarettes were addictive. They knew it caused cancer. They hid all of that, and they eventually paid the price. Facebook knew that their algorithms were leading to addiction, and they knew that their algorithms would lead to self-harm, and they hid all of that. Not the same, because we know cigarettes cause cancer in a way that maybe there's but pretty close.
Yeah, I don't want to. It's easy to get into the comparing of which addiction, addicted to social media, cigarettes, alcohol, and gambling, destroys a life or lives the most. But if we just took gambling, like, versus drinking, if drinking doesn't destroy your relationships and kill somebody or destroy your liver, and you can find a way to quit after a couple of years, you can limit the damage. But man, losing $100,000 is tough to recover from. But more importantly,
it also brings it, by the way, as we're finding out with the NBA, and I'm sorry if your audience doesn't want me talking about this, it also involves organized crime. I mean, organized crime makes so much money off of this, and then uses it for things that you and I no one likes,
Well, as Aaron in the chat says, sports gambling had more integrity when the mob was running it. The other,
no, that's not true. That was true 15. It's not true anymore, because the money behind FanDuel and the other big companies, it is in their interest to stop cheating. It is in their interest to make sure that Terry Rozier doesn't fake an injury. So I think that the problem is not at that level. The problem is the destruction of lives. That's the
cool thing about doing these live is the live chat, and I look forward to the audience getting bigger simply from the fact that we'll have more people weighing in. But I've got two guys, both of which I know are longtime listeners, so I know who they are. Both of them basically saying, Ronnie says I had to explain why not to gamble to my 13-year-old. And then I won't say, because maybe he wants it just for the chat, I have a 16-year-old student, so a teacher, already addicted to gambling. Right. So it would seem that a conversation has to be had with young men especially, but young women I'm sure as well, about betting and gambling, because when I was little, my dad took us on a ferry in international waters from Maine to Nova Scotia, where gambling was legal for like an hour. And he used that 1 hour to teach us a lesson not to gamble. And he made $120 in 5 seconds. So it backfired. But like, he took that unique opportunity to try to teach us a lesson. And now you literally have to do that as a parent. You have to talk to your kids, not only about the dangers of everything else that we've always talked about, but now gambling as well, because it's so accessible.
Yes. I mean, if we had this conversation in 2008, when, I would have said, it's like, to me, it's like drugs. It's like prostitution. It's, it's victimless crimes, whatever. It's not true anymore. The phone is so addictive.
Yeah.
And these companies like FanDuel, who, by the way, sponsor the NBA, sponsor professional sports.
Sure.
It's not that they are crooked, and it's not that they are doing things to affect the integrity of the game. It's that their product, like cigarettes, is so addictive that we may have to rethink what we view as victimless crimes. We just may have to rethink that.
It's true of all the deadly sins once you can monetize them.
Yes, but the difference. Oh, by the way, before we end, I know we have to go. Can we talk for 1 minute about the comet?
The who?
The comet.
Comet?
The aliens coming to America. Yes, you do. Really?
No, I don't. I've been punched out of the news for 2 days because I was trying to literally not pay attention to news around my 50th. But looking it up.
No, we don't have to do this. All I will say is there is a non-frivolous chance that there is an interstellar object. Non-frivolous. I'm saying like 5%. There's a Harvard law professor thinks let me just put it this way, Pete. A Harvard law professor with a great reputation says there's a 40% chance that there's a thing going around the sun right now that may in fact be interstellar life or interstellar or something. Interstellar.
Oh.
Yes. You should. This sounds like the typical conspiracy.
Believes interstellar objects might be proof we are not alone. I want to figure that out. Avi Loeb.
Yes. And here's my interest in this. And it's my only interest. Well, I mean, aliens are cool, but leaving that aside, if for any reason we should be able to make contact with interstellar, I don't know what you call it, anything, it does go a long way to our debates about God. And I would like, and that wouldn't be a bad thing.
NASA has discounted the Harvard.
NASA's not talking about this. I don't trust NASA for 1 second.
That a rare interstellar object hurtling through our solar system is a relic from civilization in another celestial neighborhood and could potentially be dire for humanity.
That's not my interest in this. I don't think we're all going to die next week, but I do think there's a non-frivolous chance that this is an interstellar object that was made by some kind of life form, not just a comet that broke off of something. And all that does for me is it tells me people of faith are going to have a hard reckoning.
I just want to say, I know we're live. I don't appreciate you hijacking to something I had no idea what the fuck you're talking about. I feel like I look like a real idiot for not knowing about your dumb comet.
Yeah. You're not an idiot. You're just old and 50. That's all.
I'm old and 50.
I knew you when you were a kid. Isn't that amazing? Like you were like 37 when I first met you or something.
You've never known me when I had hair though.
You were just like a almost a toddler. I mean, in a way. And now you've grown into this amazing 50-year-old person.
I don't know about that.
It's true.
I'm very flawed.
We all are, Pete. Except for Batman. Yes. I just read a great book. By the way, your audience. I just read a great book called Trust. Really good.
Trust.
Little bit hard going, a little bit, but it's worth it. 2 great surprises in this book.
I will. I'm glad I recommended mine, and I look forward to yours. And to those of you who joined us live, you're welcome. I mean, thank you. Thank you.
I do want to add that we'll be back. Same bat time, same bat channel.
Love it. Love that you can reference the original show that your dad would not let you.
I ran away from home because of that show.
Really funny. Because your dad wouldn't let you watch TV.
My parents let me watch the first episode, not knowing that it was continued to the next episode. They wouldn't let me watch the next episode.
You got addicted to TV.
Yes.
That man.
Yes.
See?
Yes. So I ran away. I still say it's one of the best satires ever on television. Easily.
If you say so. All right. Thank you very much for joining me.
Let's all hope the Supreme Court does the right thing tomorrow. But
watch the arguments tomorrow. Tell everybody about it.
You can't watch the arguments. You can only hear the arguments. I wish we could watch.
Pay attention to the arguments tomorrow. You're right. Good point. Thank you. And thank you for everybody watching live. Appreciate it. Can't do it without your support. Patreon.com/Pete Dominic. Thanks, Segall. And go support him in all the ways. And I'm going to end it now. Ending it.